On today's episode of the J Area Podcast, we dive into a brief history lesson revolving around Rey Mysterio and the many betrayals he has suffered from throughout his past tag team partners as well as close friends throughout his time in the WWE. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the J Area Podcast. My name is Jose Ramos Jr., and if you've been following this channel and the podcast, you would know that I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. So if you're as big of a fan as I am, please consider sharing, and subscribing for more wrestling content such as the J Area Podcast. Of course, recently on an episode of Friday Night SmackDown, we saw that Carlito would eventually turn his back on each member of the LWO by betraying Dragon Lee along with Rey Mysterio and other members, as I mentioned, demonstrating his true colors and the jealousy that he had felt while Rey Mysterio invited the newest member, Dragon Lee of course, into the LWO. But this wasn't the first time that we've seen a popular star such as Rey Mysterio have his friends, his close confidants, turn their back on him rather. It all starts right. We have to go back into a brief lesson. Of course, Rey Mysterio had joined the WWE in 2002 after the purchase of WCW. He would spend some time at home, probably enjoying those guaranteed contracts that WCW was providing its talent, thus not really having any reason to work. But he would return to wrestling, debuting on Friday Night SmackDown in July of 2002. Now, throughout the course of his early tenure on SmackDown, he would be a member of the SmackDown 6, which would include himself, Edge, Eddie and Chavo Guerrero, Kurt Angle, and Chris Benoit. Rey Mysterio would eventually gain enough popularity and stardom with the WWE audience where he would gain a great opportunity by being placed in a program with close friend, on-screen and off-screen, Eddie Guerrero. That would be in 2005. February 2005, he and Eddie Guerrero would challenge for the WWE Tag Team Championships against the Basham Brothers at the 2005 event No Way Out. They would actually win the championship and begin this buddy rivalry between the two of them. And heading into WrestleMania 21, which is one of my all-time favorite events, one of my all-time favorite WrestleMania events to be specific, which we've covered on the channel before. They would start a rivalry heading into that event. And it became this friendly competition between two close friends. They were tag team champions at that time, and it had never been done before where two tag team champions would face off against one another in a one-on-one matchup. The only other matchup that I would put on the scale, obviously was better than this WrestleMania 21 event, it was the Halloween Havoc 1997 matchup between Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero. But I digress. We head into WrestleMania 21. It is the opener of the event, one of the greatest openers in WrestleMania history, and we would see Rey Mysterio emerge victorious. There's a visible expression of disappointment on Eddie Guerrero's face, just because he knew he was this close in defeating Rey Mysterio, and up until then, he had never defeated Rey Mysterio. So over the course of the next couple of weeks, we see Eddie and Rey still having that cordial relationship. Of course, they're close like brothers in a way. But then came Eminem, Mercury Nitro, and Melina, who would challenge for those very tag team championships that they had won a couple months prior. And this is where it gets interesting. Eddie Guerrero, in the moment of need, Rey Mysterio getting beaten down by his opponents, reaches over, crawling, inch by inch, getting closer to his tag team partner, to someone he considers a close friend, a brother. And Eddie Guerrero jumps off of the apron, betraying Rey Mysterio, leaving him by himself to fend off of a young, hungry, up-and-coming tag team like Eminem. Thus, leading to Eminem defeating Rey Mysterio and capturing tag team gold in their debut. Rey Mysterio would come out the next week wondering why. Why would you leave me? Eddie Guerrero wouldn't provide him an answer. And over the course of those weeks, Rey Mysterio was just wanting an answer. Why? Why would you betray me? And we get closer and closer to the month of May, and this is where a young Jose was a huge fan of Friday Night SmackDown. At this time, it was still on Thursdays, but I can remember Eddie and Rey on one episode, and Eddie Guerrero just demolishes, destroys Rey Mysterio. He attacks him. He leaves him bloody, battered, and beaten. I can recall him carrying Rey Mysterio in a brainbuster position, drops him on his head on the steel steps, again, drenched in a crimson mask. And he rips off the mask of Rey Mysterio, which is now tethered. It's ripped up. It's full of debris. And me, as a young fan, at this point in my life, I was, 7 years old. And I'm wondering what is going on. These two were close like friends, like brothers, as I mentioned. But Rey Mysterio is left in a pile of his own blood. And in the forthcoming weeks, we would see Eddie Guerrero cutting promo after promo about how he was the main guy in that tag team. That he became obsessed. Why was the audience becoming such big fans of Rey Mysterio? But then it hit him. It dawned on him. He's never beaten Rey Mysterio. He became obsessed with this idea, with the notion that he couldn't beat Rey Mysterio. So they have their match at Judgment Day 2005. And of course, heading into that event, it was Eddie Guerrero trying to focus and have all these ideas as to how he could defeat Rey Mysterio. He tried to channel that anger, that anguish, as a means to defeat the one man that eluded him. But during that battle at Judgment Day 2005, Rey Mysterio, as resilient as ever, would not go down, and ultimately it would result in a disqualification as Eddie Guerrero would swing a steel chair at Rey Mysterio, again failing to defeat the one man he has never defeated. And then we get to July of 2005, and it becomes more personal. Eddie Guerrero starts hanging around Dominic Mysterio, the son of Rey, who we will get to later. And he starts hinting at this secret that he has. And he would love to read Dominic a bedtime story, a story that not even his own father has revealed to him. He challenges Rey to another match at the Great American Bash, where if he wins, he would be able to reveal his little secret to the world. But if Rey Mysterio wins, he'll keep it to himself. And we have another fun matchup between two of the all-time greatest. And Rey Mysterio emerges victorious again. So now we're thinking it's the end of the story. Now we're thinking Rey Mysterio conquered his enemy. Nope. Because in the famed words of Eddie Guerrero, he lied. And he would go on to share this secret with the world. And again, me, 7 years old, it was appointment television. I had to watch every single second, especially when it came to this storyline, because I very much looked up to an Eddie Guerrero, to a Rey Mysterio, not only because of their greatness, because of their ability, but because of what they meant to my own heritage, to my own community of Hispanics. Eddie Guerrero, in front of the world, would reveal to Dominic that Rey wasn't his father, that he was. He would say the prophetic line of, "I'm your papi, Dominic." And I'll never forget watching it, seeing Dominic questioning Rey, asking, "Is it true, Dad? Is it really true?" And a baffled and bewildered Rey Mysterio who had no words for his son. Dominic would run off. And Eddie Guerrero ultimately would have another shot at humiliating Rey Mysterio as they would go to SummerSlam, August 21st, 2005 in Washington, D.C. I remember it well. It was the very first pay-per-view that we bought as a family. And they would have the now infamous ladder match for the custody of Dominic. Another fun matchup. It had Rey Mysterio come out in Fantastic Four attire, and Rey Mysterio would emerge victorious once again. You're sensing a pattern here. Eddie Guerrero could not get over the hump. And now, Rey Mysterio has full custody of Dominic Mysterio. And that storyline of him announcing that he was actually the father, because Rey and Angie weren't able to produce a child of their own. Eddie Guerrero, who had a child out of wedlock, who had a child that he couldn't take care of, he decided to allow Rey and Angie to adopt him. That was the storyline behind it. Obviously, in real life, we know Dominic is the son of Rey Mysterio, but to see that story unfold on television, I will never forget it. And it was part of the reason. It was one of the storylines that had me hook, line, and sinker when it came to wrestling. But in conclusion to the Eddie Guerrero saga, he could not get over the hump until finally, on the premiere episode of Friday Night SmackDown, they had a steel cage match to end the rivalry, and Rey Mysterio finally suffers a loss to Eddie Guerrero. He defeats his one opponent that he could not face inside of a steel cage. And Eddie Guerrero would go on to battle for the world title, and unfortunately, 2 months later in November, he would pass away. And in the coming months, Rey Mysterio was dedicating these matches to his close friend, to his fallen friend. In fact, his 2006 Royal Rumble victory, he dedicated it to Eddie Guerrero. And eventually he would win the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania 22. And as world champion, he defended that championship with all the honor that he had, in memory of his friend. And in doing so, he opened himself to the audience in a new way, where it was not only for himself, but it was to honor Eddie Guerrero. And you saw the support that a Vicky Guerrero, Eddie's widow, Chavo Guerrero, Eddie's nephew, they began to support Rey. Rey would wear the armband that said EG, Eddie Guerrero's initials. He would come out saying Viva la Raza. You would see him do the little dance that Eddie would do, and the fans got behind it. They would cheer for Eddie. And at the Great American Bash, King Booker would challenge Rey Mysterio for that said world championship. And as he's getting ready to defeat King Booker, out comes Chavo Guerrero. After months and months of voicing his support, emotionally, we become invested in this family. He grabs a chair and he swings it at Rey Mysterio, betraying him just as his uncle did a year prior. And in that moment, again, I'm suffering from flashbacks. Why, Chavo? Why would you do this to someone that your family considered family? And on the incoming weeks of SmackDown, he would profess how he wasn't family, that Chavo was Eddie's family, that Rey Mysterio, leeching off of the Guerrero name, had no business parading around, celebrating the memory of Eddie Guerrero, because he was in blood. So Chavo did the one thing that made sense, and that was cost Rey Mysterio that world title. A title that he arguably won because of Eddie Guerrero. That's the thought process that he went through. And they have a matchup at SummerSlam between between Chavo and Rey Mysterio. A matchup that would see Chavo Guerrero emerge victorious and begin this feud to take a turn into a much more personal feud, as Vicky Guerrero would also side with Chavo, her nephew-in-law, essentially. And it would lead to a matchup at No Mercy 2006, where they had a Falls Count Anywhere matchup that Rey Mysterio would emerge victorious. And as a tiebreaker, the rubber match. On an episode of Friday Night SmackDown, it was an I Quit match between Chavo and Rey. And again, another memory of mine that is ingrained forever, as Rey Mysterio is scaling up one of the scaffoldings, and Chavo manages to trip him up and has Rey hanging upside down, his knee still intact into the structure, and Chavo grabs another steel chair and whips into his knee several times before Rey finally screams the words, "I quit." Chavo, avenging the memory of his uncle in his own mind. Rey has now suffered 2 betrayals, by two men that he considered to be brothers, two men he considered to be family. But as a result of that loss in the I Quit match, not only did he lose the match and lose his close friends, but he would lose nearly a year of his career, as he would suffer another knee injury that would see him out for about a year. He wouldn't return until 2007 for the SummerSlam event, as he would return and defeat Chavo Guerrero. And from there on out, you would see him in feuds against guys like Fit Finlay. You would see him feud against Edge for the world title. He would suffer another injury and would miss some time. But then he hits his stride. He gains another friend in Batista through their common love for Eddie Guerrero. They had won the tag team championships back in December of 2005, a month after Eddie's passing. But now they're feuding for the world title. And we're heading into the Bragging Rights pay-per-view in 2009. And it's a fatal four-way match. The Undertaker defending his World Heavyweight Championship against CM Punk, against Rey Mysterio, and Batista. And obviously in that moment, it's a free-for-all. It's every man for himself. They all have a common goal. They want to emerge as the World Heavyweight Champion. And naturally, men are going to go ahead and get their opportunity to try to secure a pinfall, or perhaps make one of their opponents submit. So naturally, when there's a moment that Batista is edging closer and closer to winning that world title, and Rey just happens to stop that pinfall, preventing Batista from getting that win. But ultimately, it's at the end of that matchup that we really see the true colors of Batista. He recognizes that Rey Mysterio is in his way of securing another world title reign. He grabs Rey by his neck, holding him up against the ring apron, and he screams at Rey Mysterio, "You're supposed to be my friend," and throws him into the barricade. Again, another close friend of Rey Mysterio betraying him. This time, not in the name of competitiveness and gaining a win, not in the name of jealousy or avenging a fallen family member, but this time for greed. Batista wanted to be the world champion by any means necessary, even if it meant betraying someone like Rey Mysterio, who was supposed to be his close friend. And they would have a mother match at Survivor Series where Batista would demolish Rey Mysterio. He's now down 3 friends. Rey Mysterio doesn't have the best track record when it comes to partners. He doesn't really know how to pick them, apparently, because each of them happen to have this indistinct quality that allows them to get in their head and betray Rey Mysterio. I don't know what it is. I don't know if Rey Mysterio knows what it is, or even if he's been able to recognize, is it him? Is he the problem? Or is it his inability to judge of character in gaining the trust of those around him? After this feud, of course, Rey Mysterio would have on and off feuds. You know, guys like a CM Punk, guys like The Miz. Ultimately, we wouldn't really see Rey have something of substance until he would return. In 2018, he would return for the Royal Rumble. And from there on out, it was clear that Rey Mysterio was now hitting that point of his career where it was his job to put over the younger talent. In 2019, he would actually introduce Dominic Mysterio, who we had seen last in 2010 with an angle of CM Punk, but was most notably remembered for his time in the summer of 2005 during the custody of Dominic buildup. And we see him running around with his dad, fighting off the likes of a Brock Lesnar, until finally he becomes more active in the ring. These guys had WrestleMania matches. For example, they faced Logan Paul and The Miz at WrestleMania 38. They would actually become the first pair of father and son to reign as WWE Tag Team Champions. It was a beautiful moment. You love to see a good feel-good story between these two, between a father and son, between a legendary wrestler like Rey Mysterio, who's trying to pass on the advice, the experience, the knowledge that he has obtained throughout the course of his career. And for those that don't know, Dominic Mysterio was out here paving the road for himself. He was paying his dues. He was training in Japan, in Mexico, all around the US, trying to gain knowledge, gain experience on his own time. And as he's parading around with his father, there's one group out there that happens to be quite an influence on a Dominic Mysterio. Ironically enough, the group named after the event that would see where it all began, Judgment Day. As we remember, Judgment Day, of course, was one of the events that Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio would battle it out in 2005. And with the influence of a Finn Balor, of a Damian Priest, and most notably Rhea Ripley, they would gain the influence of a Dominic Mysterio and would even go so far as to convince him to leave his father. Because they would be feuding with Rey and Edge and Dominic. But who did Rey choose as his partner at the Clash at the Castle event? He chose Edge. Again, Dominic, feeling neglected as he did in the early years of his life, betrayed his father, Rey Mysterio, because he sided with Edge. Rey had won tag team gold with Dominic. He has worked with Dominic for the last year and a half of his career, yet he chose Edge. Dominic, hearkening back to when he was a kid, realizing and recognizing that Rey wasn't as present as he would have liked to. Why? Because he was on the road. He was out providing a living for his family. Dominic would begin throwing out these insults, calling him a deadbeat dad, that he wasn't around, and you got to see this heelish nature that Dominic Mysterio was now becoming accustomed to. And it was brilliant. It was great. It's now gotten him over to the point now where he's one of the hottest acts in terms of a heel, that is, in wrestling. Anytime he comes out and just holds a microphone, it elicits a reaction that allows the audience to take control of the show. We can't even hear Dominic when he speaks. All because of this betrayal. And naturally, this leads to their matchup at WrestleMania 39, where Rey Mysterio would actually get the upper hand and defeat his son Dominic on a large, grand scheme of things, on the grand stage of WrestleMania. And in doing so, he loses his son Dominic, which, by the way, was a wonderful build-up as he and Rhea Ripley would torment the Mysterio family, not only through Thanksgiving, but through Christmas, through any other holiday. And it leads to WrestleMania 39, where obviously there's the Judgment Day backing up Dominic Mysterio. So who does Rey have? He has Legado. He enlists Legado del Fantasma, which included Santos Escobar, Cruz del Toro, Joaquin Wilde, and Zelina Vega. And he enlists them in becoming new members of the recently reformed Latino World Order, the LWO. And I thought, wow, what a great moment. What a great callback to the LWO, the group that Eddie Guerrero started way back when in WCW. Everything comes back to Eddie. And in doing so, he creates this new family that he isn't able to bring in Dominic, because Dominic has gone off and joined his own family in the Judgment Day. But Rey Mysterio becomes close. He's a mentor, a friend, a role model for each of these young members of the LWO. Santos Escobar is essentially his own little project. He's supposed to be the next big name in professional wrestling, not only in terms of the Latino community, but in general. He has that ability, that opportunity to learn off of a Rey Mysterio, to soak up the knowledge of a legend like Rey Mysterio. And naturally, Rey Mysterio is a hot commodity. Who wouldn't want to listen from someone with 30 plus years of experience, a former world champion, tag team champion, intercontinental champion, United States champion, cruiserweight champion, Royal Rumble winner, WrestleMania competitor? He's done it all. one of the greatest, if not the greatest, masked luchadores of all time. So you see a returning Carlito, who they invite to the group. And now, because these two go back, all the way back to the Ruthless Aggression era in the mid-2000s, you start to see the wheels turning. You start to see Santos growing a little envious, a little jealous of the attention that is being brought towards our Carlito. There wasn't supposed to be any animosity between the two, but it was that hint of jealousy that we saw growing, dwelling inside of Santos, to the point where he attacks Rey Mysterio. Another knee injury, forcing Rey to be gone for quite some time. And he cuts a promo, a very memorable promo, where he says he prays that Rey never comes back. He says he hopes they have to amputate his leg. Ridiculous, but memorable. And it builds and builds until this past year's WrestleMania, where we see Rey Mysterio. And supposedly it was supposed to be a mystery partner of his choosing to challenge Santos Escobar and Dominic Mysterio. But who would Rey choose? Naturally, we all thought it was going to be Carlito. Why wouldn't it be? But again, just like it was done months prior, Rey Mysterio invites another member into the LWO. This time, Dragon Lee. He invites Dragon Lee, and he's going to be a part of the tag team. But then, the SmackDown prior, Dragon Lee's attacked. He's injured. He's unable to compete at WrestleMania, but we're left with questions. Why? Who? Who could be responsible for this? Naturally, the inclination is Legado. It had to be Santos. It had to be Dominic. Who else would it be? Nope. Instead, we got a replacement. And it wasn't Carlito, even though everyone assumed it would be him. No, instead it was Andrade, who would come in and help Rey Mysterio dispatch of Dominic and his partner Santos at WrestleMania 40. But now we're left with more questions than answers. Who is the culprit? Who is guilty? And now, this past episode of Friday Night SmackDown, we see exactly who it was. It was, in fact, Carlito. But why? We haven't had any explanation. But I think it's clear. I think we can see where they're going with it. Obviously, the common answer, the reasoning as to why he attacked Dragon Lee, forcing him out of the WrestleMania match. Carlito thought it was him. It should have been me. I'm your right-hand man. I'm clearly the best man for the job. So he attacks Dragon Lee because he is a threat to his position within the LWO. He's also in that Santos Escobar role where it's supposed to be you and I. Why are we including this new guy? Aren't I enough? That's not cool. And now the group in its entirety, the LWO, have been drafted to Monday Night Raw. This includes Joaquin Wilde. This includes Cruz del Toro, Zelina, Rey, Dragon Lee, and even Carlito. So now the feud moves over to Monday Night Raw. We're going to have to wait and see until next week and see how it progresses. Obviously with Backlash upcoming this Saturday. But it's only another demonstration as to why Rey Mysterio has a tough history with tag team partners. And that leads me to the question. What's the reason? Why can't he sustain a healthy relationship with his tag team partners? Is he the problem? Because it seems to me that Rey Mysterio can't catch a break. He opens up too much. He's too much of a trustworthy individual that these guys take advantage of it. Rey is trying to appease all members of his family, all members of his friends, all members of his faction, the LWO. And it keeps turning awry. And it's a shame to see Guys like Batista and the Guerreros, who we considered family. Guys like Santos Escobar and Carlito, who were his proteges in a way. To his own son, Dominic Mysterio, who was also staying on Monday Night Raw, by the way. So we might see that feud rekindle. And I'm curious to see how it goes. To see the evolution that Rey Mysterio has gone through, it's really a lack thereof. It's almost as if he doesn't learn from his mistakes, as if he doesn't learn from his prior experiences when it comes to being betrayed. I saw somewhere on the channel that someone commented under a short little snippet of my narration, my diatribe regarding Rey Mysterio, and they said it's like he's the new Sting, because he's the ultimate babyface who just happens to keep getting betrayed by those around him. And I think that's a fair assessment to Rey Mysterio. I myself have always looked up to Rey Mysterio, again, not only because of his greatness, but because of what he meant for the Latin community. And to see him always involved in these big storylines, it's always such a treat. And I'm curious to see how they move forward, especially with Carlito. And now that Legado and the LWO are separate brands, where do we go from here? What's the next progression for Rey Mysterio? Naturally, I think it would be Carlito. But after that, long term, where are we going with this? What do you guys think? Which of these really stood out to you in terms of your fandom of pro wrestling? Can you remember your first time seeing Rey Mysterio? What are your thoughts about what they're going through with the Carlito storyline? And how do you think we revisit the feud between Dominic and Rey? It's an ongoing feud, but are we ever going to get that payoff? Will it be a third matchup at WrestleMania? How do you think Rhea Ripley fit into it all regarding Dominic leaving Rey? Of course, there's always more questions that need to be answered. Go ahead and sound off in the comments if you will. If you guys enjoyed this episode of the J Area Podcast, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more wrestling content by yours truly. And of course, you can find me on all social media outlets at JustJose_3, and I will see you guys on the next episode of the J Area Podcast.